Hello everyone, my name is N.
And my name is Yeji, and this is Our Own Canon.
We created this show as a way for us to discuss and debate pieces of art, literature, philosophy, television, film.
Basically, anything and everything that has left an impression on us as Asian American college-age nerds with social anxiety and affinity for Vietnamese iced coffee.
Nerds, which we absolutely are, so get prepared to get lost in the weeds.
But don't worry, we'll offset with enough irony and sarcassery to keep things not boring for y'all.
And of course, thank you for listening and supporting the show. We hope you love what we have prepared today. All right, Yeji. I think we got a pretty interesting one this week, huh?
I am so excited. Oh my god.
Yes. So for this
is the
week,
greatest thing I've ever seen.
it quite literally might be one of my favorite things I've read. I don't know, in this year maybe, but maybe of all time.
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
I'll say all time.
Really? Okay,
Yeah.
that's pretty high praise.
I know, but it's so good. It's that good, guys.
Maybe we should have like a running list.
Yeah, this is definitely S tier for me, though.
Okay, so by the end of this whole podcast, we're just gonna have like this whole tier list of everything.
Wait, that's a good idea. Yes, we'll do that.
Okay.
They don't even know what we're talking about yet.
Yeah. So after this episode, we'll how about we also rank our last episode's thing, and then we can also rank this one. How about
Okay,
that?
awesome.
Okay. Well, you're right. People don't know what we're talking about. So why don't we introduce it? This week we are doing Superman Smashes the Klan. Right, and I feel like I don't need any more pitch other than it's called Superman Smashes the Klan. It's come on.
Yes, and it is Klan with a K.
Yes, it's that Klan. Like every time I tell people about this, they're like, "Do you mean that Klan?" And I'm like, "Yes,
that Klan."
This book is written by Jean Luang Yang, and it's drawn. This is a graphic novel, and it's drawn by Guri Hiru, which is a Japanese like drawing company. I'm pretty sure there's a more technical term for this, and I'm not getting it.
A studio?
Studio. Yes, it's a Japanese art studio. Jeez. If that combination sounds very familiar, you know why? It's because they also worked on all of the Avatar books, or all the Avatar graphic novels.
Oh, shoot. Yeah, you're right. They did. Oh, I still need to get around to actually reading those because I haven't. But the animated series is so good. Whoever hasn't seen that yet needs to get on that right now.
Yeah, and after seeing how Yang writes, I'm actually very much excited to read anything else he writes now.
I know. Yeah, he's absolutely fantastic. This comic is, like I said before, probably one of the best things I've read of all time, and like the whole time I just found myself really wishing that I had read something like this when I was younger, or I had anything similar to this when I was younger. This is a comic book that is geared towards audiences ages 7 to 12, so
They consider me a 12-year-old because I also felt like it was meant for me, and I'm like 10 years late on this.
Right. Yeah, I'm so jealous of these kids nowadays, man. Like this generation, they're so lucky.
These kids have it easy. When we were little, all the books we read didn't say anything about racism. Yeah.
No, legitimately though.
Yeah, so if you can't tell, Yeji and I very much like this book. In fact, we like this book so much. We're not just going to do one episode on it. We're going to do two. All right?
I'm so excited.
So here's the plan. For this episode, we're going to focus mostly on like big things. Themes and background and context and all this stuff. All the big things. We're not going to get into too many details. We'll probably drop some bits and pieces from the actual book every once in a while. But in general, we just want to talk about the big themes and we set that up. So next week, or the next 2 weeks, we do this every other week. So next 2 weeks we can get into like the nitty gritty details and have like a good background of information and lens to look at the whole thing in particular detail.
And this is definitely a piece that does require a little bit more context because this comic wasn't actually Yang's idea. This is actually based off of a radio show on. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So the original Superman Smashes the Klan was actually called Superman versus the Clan of the Fiery Cross, which was a radio show published in 1946. Uh, and actually, fun fact, it's called the Clan of the Fiery Cross because they didn't want to get sued by the clan. So it's a legally distinct entity. Yes. You law people know a thing or two about this, right?
Yeah, I also just think it's really ironic that as like a hate supremacist group, the Klan would have any legal credibility anywhere, but you know, this is the United States, so so yeah, like actually like when you first introduced this to me and you told me that it was based off of something that came out in the 1940s, I was shocked. I mean, really. This obviously it's not a perfect transcription of what happens in the radio show, but there are some ideas in here that are definitely more overt than I think would have been accepted at the time. But you have more context on that.
Yeah. So I actually did listen to the whole 3 hour radio show.
Oh
Uh,
God.
it, I say it like it was painful. It was actually a pretty fun experience. It was a pretty cool window into the past, and it was also a really good story in general.
And you
Uh,
did it so that I didn't have to.
uh, but yeah, this is actually a really interesting piece of like comic book history because it not only did it feature Asian characters, which was just I mean, okay, there were Asian characters in comic books before, but they weren't always great. But this one was one with a much more like mundane Asian characters, and it it used that in a pretty interesting way that I don't think comics really did for
Hmm.
that time. But it also introduced like this this radio show in general, not this particular Clan of the Fiery Cross, but the series that the Clan of the Fiery Cross is a part of, was also like
Hmm.
really seminal in Superman history. Kryptonite was
Hmm.
actually just not a thing until the radio show did it. Kryptonite's actually a radio show original, not a comic thing.
Holy crap. That's crazy. I did not realize that. So it would did that just like became canon for Superman after the radio show came out then, huh?
Yeah, this radio show, which was super popular, super in the mainstream enough to change the canon of Superman, was also a place that wanted to explore racism and stuff, and that was like really cool. Especially when you think about the times, you don't really think about things like this.
Also specifically for the intention of roasting the absolute crap out of the KKK.
Yes, some stories have it that so the clan comes in waves, right? They were founded, and then they get like kind of destroyed, and then they come back again, and they get kind of destroyed. This was like the third time they were like coming up, and actually it is said that the radio show people were not too happy about this, so they specifically went out to make this radio show to purposely blast the clan and just like make fun of them and it is it seems like it worked for that particular wave of the clan rising. Some reports have it that like people would like after this radio show came out would go and like just like go to clan meetings and just heckle them.
I love everything about that. I've always wanted to go to a clan meeting just to heckle.
I don't know if it's like particularly safe for us to do that, but you can try. Maybe keep like geolocation on or something just so like
Yeah. I'll see your location. Yeah. No worries. No, but that's actually fascinating to think about. Especially just as someone who grew up like now, right? Like in contemporary times where it sort of feels like the condemnation of groups like this that are so extremist to the point of I'm going to put this gently, but like burning crosses and stuff in people's front yards and like these extremist groups that pop up, even now, like it sort of kind of seems like there isn't as much condemnation towards them in modern mainstream media. Again, like modern mainstream media enough to change the canon of one of the most popular superheroes of all time,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah,
into
Zack
something
Snyder's
sort
Man of
of
Steel is
different.
not doing the
Like,
type of things that the radio show was doing.
don't do Zack Snyder like that at all. Yeah, you're worried about the KKK suing us. Well, DC might be hot on their heels.
Hey, 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 hey. We are talking very good things about DC right now, actually, with Superman
Yes,
Attached
yes,
to the
we
Clan.
are. Yes, we are.
So
No,
let
very,
how
very much appreciate the way that they did this for sure.
how about we get into it then?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
for the like I said, for this episode, we want to be kind of broader picture big. So the way I've like have it envisioned in my outline right here, that
Mhm,
I'm just gonna like number off a couple themes that I think that'd be interesting to talk about. Just
mhm.
chat about them for a bit. So theme number one: Superman smashes the Klan. What do you think the first theme's gonna be?
You know, just spitballing here, but like, racism.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty. I think that's a pretty good one. So, something about one
Hey.
of those four words really just makes you think racism, and I think it's the.
Yes. Clan of the Fiery Cross. Very overt, very clear. Yes. A mastery of language for sure. No, yeah. This comic is mostly about racism, if the title didn't already clue you in, and it covers a wide variety of racism and the kinds of racism that exist right now and from the time that the radio show came out. So, yeah, it's really fascinating.
Yeah, I feel like so what part of like the aspects of like racism do you think like this book really like hammers home really well?
Well, obviously, with the clan, that's sort of the main focus of, like very extreme forms of racism, shooting those down and obviously condemning them to the highest degree. But there's also these really subtle forms of racism. And I think that that is almost what comes across clearer in terms of messaging and in terms of what Yang is sort of trying to get across about these different sort of layers. It sort of kind of seems like there's about three levels here, and I don't know, you can agree, disagree, add some of your own levels here, but the first one is outright condemnation, but also silent prejudice. We see this sort of with Chuck's mother, where she talks about how, oh, like the clan, like they're absolutely despicable, but also there's like not really anything wrong with wanting to like be with your own people, right? Sort of, outward condemnation but inward sort of biases, right? um the second is just interpersonal reactions. We see this a little bit with like the head of the Lee family, Mr. Lee, Dr. Lee. He is just kind of like the racism that we see sort of on a regular basis, right? Like he sees people that are different from him and he wants to be away from them. Again, we're going to go into like all of these scenes in more detail later, but and then the third level is the Klan. I'm not gonna say anything else about that because I feel like it's obvious why that's level three.
I actually think it's like really interesting, the depiction of like the type of like terror that the Klan does, because uh the Klan, at least in this like super overt sense, is like really not existent right now
Mm-hmm.
in our modern day. So I think like sometimes we talk about in history and it's kind of like this thing that happened. But the book does a really good job of like running you through the process of like how it feels to be faced with this extreme type of racism. Like I always knew cross burnings were like bad and scary, but that's like an intellectual thing. Like I knew it in my head, but I never experienced that. I couldn't like understand it on that like particular level. But reading the book, right, and seeing how like yeah, how terrifying it would be to like go home or like to wake up in the middle of the night and like see a burning cross in your yard, right? And not only that, but the people who are doing it are all masked. Like you don't know who they are, and I can like
Mm-hmm.
really see like the psychological terror that would happen with like not knowing who in your neighborhood was doing this, and why they're doing it or why they hate you, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is a type of terror that Yang just depicted so like surreally, and not just
Mm-hmm.
Yang, it's also on the artist too. The
Mm.
studio did like a magnificent job, just like really hammering it home.
Right. Yeah. No, I remember because it sort of comes out of nowhere, even though there is sort of this setup where we know something is about to happen, but we don't exactly know what. And I honestly thought their first act was going to be subtler, you know? I think that having the first act of terrorism, which, by the way, there's more acts of terrorism that they do after this, right? Like, it's not
Yeah,
just that they burn the cross in the front yard and then they go away, right? This is the first thing that they do in the book to the family that literally just moved in there like that day. And I don't know, it just, yeah, you're right. It just really drove home how intensely terrifying that would be because personally for me I'm used to dealing with levels 1 and 2, right?
hmm,
Those sort of more like subtler, I mean they can be overt, but like microaggressions are a huge thing, you know.
they're not
um
acts of terrorism.
right, they're not they're also people that I know the faces of, right?
Hmm.
They are not strangers to me in the way that I do not know how to put these words to a face, right? But when you're faced with this group of people that is an entity, like it seems so much bigger and so much stronger than they actually are, which I thought was fascinating because like the moments that these members get their hoods taken off throughout the comic book series, they like lose their power in very sort of tangible key ways. And I don't know, like that was really interesting to sort of think about was like the element of anonymity within racism and how much more terrifying it can be to deal with someone who doesn't have a face,
Hmm.
especially when they're linked to an organization that is willing to do violent things, you know. That's crazy.
So for like the other two levels of racism that we see in the book,
Hmm.
like what do you find interesting about that, and like how do you find it interesting and like how it relates to our lives? Because I think that's something that we have a lot more experience with and like understand a lot better.
Right. I think that something this book did really well is portraying how these things happen around us every single day to people that aren't our enemies. They're just misinformed, right? And I think that the most clear way that this is shown is through the two sort of main characters that are very young. They're kids, right? And
Hmm.
they spend their time with other kids who say things to them that are racist, right? And it's very clear, and the way that Yang wrote this is very intentional to show like these kids have no idea what they're saying, no idea what they're talking about. There's no malice, there's no like there's no violent intention behind this. It's just them regurgitating what they've heard from other people, right? And that's the sad truth about the cycle of racism and the cycle of prejudice and judgment is that it doesn't necessarily have to have bad intentions or motivations. It can just be a simple matter of ignorance. And that's really where we see level 1 operating at. Level 2 obviously is a little bit more between the adults. There are clear instances of sort of where these people who really should know better because they are grown-ups, right, say things that are just not good, right? And this is the thing too, is that like they say things that we've heard the kids that are surrounding, you know, our protagonists, like they say the same things. So it's very clearly that these kids are mimicking what they hear like the adults in their lives saying, and sort of, you know, using that as the touchstone for the logic behind that and the morality behind that. And I don't know, it's very, very subtle, but it's not so subtle that you can like miss it, you know,
Hmm.
which I really did appreciate because I don't think Yang, even though he makes certain things subtle, even though he makes certain things overt, he never backs away from anything. He never says, like, oh, I'm going to soften this blow, or I'm going to make this, I'm going to sugarcoat this in a way that makes it like almost, it's like bubble wrapping something, you know what I mean? Which is what I think a lot of children's media does when it comes to things like racism, right? Because people don't want to expose their children to racism, but it's like Yang does such a good job. He does such a good job of making it like, no, this is something that your children can digest, and it's not going to be dumbed down for them because they
Yeah.
can handle it and they can understand it. And I was like, wow, dude, like go ham. It's
Yeah.
so good.
I think I think like Yang makes a really like genius decision in this book by having the main character be like an Asian American girl, a little Asian American
Mm-hmm.
girl.
Yeah.
And in that like that type of framing is like really great in that we get to see her processing these different types of these different issues, racism being one of them, but we'll talk about them in the other themes as well. um but it really allows like the audience to be along for the ride of seeing how like someone can be affected by these types of things, right? Because this
Mm-hmm.
wasn't something that was in the original radio show.
Mm-hmm.
There were Asian characters, and that's kind of where the racism was centered around, but they were
Yeah.
auxiliary to the actual story. And
Right.
Yang comes in and reframes everything from the perspective of a new Asian character, Roberta, um, and really like helps everyone process through all these things. And I think it's great because for people who do get it, like us, it's really cathartic, and
Mm-hmm.
um and
Yeah.
and makes us feel seen and heard. And for people who don't, I actually think it's a really good entry point to like see how this like psychologically messes with people so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's, I mean, but it's fascinating too, though, that it's it's specifically meant for children, right?
Hmm.
And so the language that it uses is almost like criminally simple, but then when you hear it like that and you look at these kids, you know, that are adorable, by the way, the animation is so good and they are so cute, right? You're like, okay, I must protect at all costs, you know? You see them dealing with things that you see, at least for me, right? Like I saw Roberta dealing with things that I dealt with when I was her age, right? I read her listening to people telling her things that I had heard, you know, when I was younger, and like not really being able to understand them, you know, and
Hmm.
that was so good. Like there's
Yeah.
such an element to that that makes it so personal and so endearing, and it makes you want to, I mean, it makes you want to root for them, right? But it also just connects to this fundamental part of how we grew up as Asian American kids in an environment where we didn't look like anyone else, you know? And but it works because it's so simple, right? It doesn't try to cover everything up in layers of nuance or complicated language or, you know, fancy showmanship of like, oh, like, look at me, I understand this topic so well. It's just Jean, like, it's just Yang being like, here is an interaction between two human beings.
Hmm.
Because that's what racism is, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know, it's just, it's done
it
so
it's
well.
crazy that racism is tackled in like this like super like interesting and like explorative way, when really like
Mm-hmm.
if you have a book called Superman Smashes the Klan, I feel like you could actually like take the easy way out and just have Superman punching Klan members and it would still be good. And the fact that both the radio show and Yang, in their own different ways, take the time to have it be more than that is
Mm.
actually just awesome.
I know, yeah. I gotta say too, though, I really appreciate that Yang brought the story back to life in such a sweet way that was accessible to so many people. You know, I mean, again, like I didn't know this radio show existed, and I know everything about Superman. You know, I grew up with Superman. I grew up with hundreds of other superheroes, right? Like I know all about
Hmm.
them. I know all about their backstories, like, and who doesn't know about kryptonite when it comes to Superman, right? And knowing
Yeah.
that he got that power from a radio show that was so mainstream that also tackled huge topics like the freaking KKK is just, it's just so like it's mind-blowing to me.
No, no,
Like
no,
that
no. It was
seems
the Clan of the Fiery Cross. We are treading on our legally distinct grounds here.
You're right. You're right.
For
Yeah,
the
no, no,
record, in the radio show it was Clan with a C, but the book doesn't like do that backpedaling as much. The Clan is actually with a K in the
yeah.
in the book.
In the book and on the cover, just so you know, which is why On was like, Superman smashes the Klan with a K. I need to get this book.
That was very close to what happened. It like I literally just saw the book and I was like, I there is no decision to be made here. I don't care what's in it. I
Yeah.
just have to have it.
And I mean, and thank God it was so good, or else like I wouldn't have been able to, read it. Though I will say, sometimes you recommend not good things to me, so I'm glad that
But
this wasn't one of
that's
them.
but those times are on purpose, okay? Okay? I know which one you're talking about, right? And guys, we're gonna have fun in the future. Trust me.
No, but like I'm just so glad that he brought this story back to life for other people to enjoy, a fresh audience that would bring new interpretations and things to the table for it. Especially directed at a generation that is even younger than we are, that I appreciate that so much, and I think that like accessibility and things to stories is so important, and I think this him making this story into a comic is making this story accessible to people now. And that is just, yeah, thank you, Yang. I don't know if you're ever going to listen to this, but thanks. This is sick. This is awesome.
All right. So theme one's racism, but somehow this amazing book not only just deals with racism, but also think it deals with other things. So theme two, assimilation. That's gonna be a fun one.
Ah, yes. Assimilation.
Yeah. So something that I think this book like does really well that the radio show didn't do, because the radio show really, I'll talk more about it later. But they're two very different things. But the
Mm,
book does a really good job in like being it from an Asian American perspective, gets to tackle a lot of like uh, ideas and topics that Asian Americans like deal with a lot, and one of those is going to be like assimilation, right?
mm-hmm.
How we exist in this world that doesn't always seem to like us,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
like the steps that we should that we take uh, to exist in that type of world.
Right.
So what really stood out to you regarding that theme?
Right. So, just a very short context here. So, the main protagonist family are the Lees, and they're moving into a suburban area in Metropolis. And so, this is where, we see those themes of assimilation, where they're coming in from Chinatown, right? A place where it's pretty monolithic in terms of the people that they were surrounded with, right? And then they're moving into a place where they are a minority, right? But the kids, they speak perfect English. The dad is a doctor and he's moving into town specifically for his job. And so, yeah, so this is sort of where we see them start to tackle this journey of trying to sort of fit in. One of the greatest parts of this, assimilation process is, again, this paralleling between a really complicated, sort of like very adult topic with just these kids, So instead of being like, oh, like, we have to like assimilate into this community and it's going to be really complicated and blah, blah, blah. It's literally just Tommy and Roberta with a group of kids trying to fit in with this group of kids, right? And it's so good. I'm just gonna say so good for everything in this book.
Yeah, I find it
But
like, yeah, what are you saying?
sorry. No, I really appreciated the way that he, one, makes that comparison, and two, the way that it's done, because obviously fitting in with even a group of kids, like, that's not easy, right? The analogy doesn't dumb it down. It just kind of makes it a little bit simpler, and it's really hard for them. We see their struggles every single time we get a glimpse into their sort of point of view, and yeah, no, it's really well done.
Yeah. I also love how like how it tackles assimilation in the way that like trying to like there are certain parts in which in which you should like take from like from the culture of like where you're living, but there's also a certain part of it where it's like if you do it too much you start to lose yourself a lot in it,
Yeah.
right? And I really love how this book like simply tackles that with like how with how like with simple things like language or like fashion, right? These like
Mhm.
things that the characters have very strong like relationships to it, and like they built a lot of their identity to it. And the dad really wants them to like abandon these in the hopes that they can like fit in better, in the hopes that like people like won't be racist to them if they just like forget these things. He seems to kind of think that uh, that like racism will stop, and the thing is, it's just like it doesn't, right? And it's really sad to see like Roberta like losing part of like what she identified so strongly with
Mhm.
in this attempt to defeat racism that wasn't going to be defeated in this way anyways. Like
Mhm.
the tragedy of how much of a lost cause it is, it really
Mhm.
hits.
Yeah. And there's just this idea and general theme of how fighting these battles can feel like it's just never going to end, it's interesting that we were talking about how the radio show made this episode to fight another swell of like a resurgence of the Klan in the city. And in this book there's multiple waves of the Klan doing worse and worse things. um, and it's a perfect analogy to real life, right? Like the way that they are handling it and the way that it takes a toll on their mental health is like, god, this feels like it's never going to end, and always feeling on edge and always feeling like you are a target of violence that you cannot escape or have any sort of control over, right? While simultaneously trying to navigate assimilating into a community that already doesn't see you as its own. This also ties back to the anonymity of the Klan, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's this great moment where Roberta doesn't want to be friendly with anyone in her group anymore because she doesn't know if any of their parents or any of them specifically were part of the attack on her home, and her worries are absolutely justified, right? Like, it would be very, very scary to live in that time and to live with that sort of thing on your shoulders, and it's just, it's not unrealistic and it's so human. And assimilation is so hard when you not only have to again fit in but also have this lingering threat of violence at your doorstep all of the time. And yeah, I don't know, like, how do you think that like the violent aspect of the Klan sort of fits into how hard it is to assimilate into certain communities, and do you think that still echoes in like modern assimilation today?
Yeah, like I think the thing that really stood out to me regarding like assimilation is just like Dr. Lee's the dad's insistence on like trying to fit in every way he can. Like you'll notice that like he'll like walk out of the house with this lab coat to like
Mm-hmm.
have a certain like aesthetic and look a certain way and project a certain type of person, and he'll tell his kids to like behave in certain ways, and he'll tell his like wife to stop speaking Chinese, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and it seems like he's like trying so desperately to try to like fit in and make the racism stop, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
literally I said we weren't going to get into details, but I'm going to get into a little bit of details. Um,
That's okay.
there's a
I got into
scene,
details before.
yeah, there's a scene where the Klan is like attacking his home. They're burning a cross in his yard. Uh, and his wife is like freaking out, and she's speaking Chinese because like that's the language that she like grew up knowing, right? And he like literally before anything else he tells her to stop speaking Chinese. She says English, dear. And then he says
Yeah,
that,
not his best moment.
yeah, and then they said like they must have the wrong people, right? Because he genuinely thinks that like he has done so much and has done so much towards fitting in that racists have no justification for hating him. But that's the thing about racism is that like there need not be a rational justification, right? He's
Mm-hmm.
not
Yeah.
white, and like that's enough for the Klan to go after him no matter what he tries to do. And it's like it's really heartbreaking for me Because I think it's something that we see in like the greater community at times, especially in like the older generations, where they try so hard to fit in, but the truth of the matter is it's just like there's just still racism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of like Dr. Lee's literally a doctor. He's like a
Mm-hmm.
well-known doctor, and like that's not gonna save him from the racism.
Yeah. Yeah. And assimilation as a theme in this book as well is also applied not only to the Lees but also sort of to like Superman, and we'll obviously get into Superman a little bit more, but um like as a person who has these like insane like superhuman powers, right? Like he doesn't necessarily fit in with the human beings either, right? So there's an interesting dichotomy between how rejection from society and difficulty with assimilation doesn't come from being lesser than, right? It doesn't come from weakness. It doesn't come from, having these inherent flaws or anything. It just comes from being different, right? Different from the majority. And I think that that was really interesting because it's so simple, but it's something that we forget. You know, this idea that we have to overcompensate all of the time for all of the things that we're missing so that we can fit in, when in reality it's not because we're missing anything. It's just because we're different. We're
Yeah,
just different, and
it's
we
nothing about us.
cannot
It's
change that.
Yeah, it's nothing about
Yeah.
us. It's about the way that people treat us.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. No, yeah. It's a hard truth to confront sometimes though, and I think that the hard truth part of it does come out with Dr. Lee, and again, I appreciate his reactions to it though because it feels very human. He's like, like no, if they just like hear about all of the good things I've done for the community, if they know that I'm a doctor, like, they'll like understand. And I'm like, I love that you think that this is how this works. I'm so sorry, right? And it's just that kind of, I don't want to say innocence, but it's just like that misunderstanding of the basis of where this kind of prejudice comes from, right?
Hmm.
And it's a trap that all of us fall into, right? We make things seem a lot more complicated than they are sometimes, but at the end of the day, sometimes it's just that people are hateful to people that don't look like them. It sucks, but
Yeah.
it's true.
Also, like
But
further note on Doctor Lee.
yeah.
Uh, so there are like a lot of aspects about Doctor Lee that I think are like relatable and understandable, but also I think like he's also a commentary on how like problematic like this ultra type of assimilation is,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because there
Yeah.
are also parts in which he's not just assimilating like cultures, but he's also assimilating like certain like bad attitudes and like racism, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I should have brought this up in the racism section. Oops. Uh, but
It's
yeah,
okay.
um, it ties in, right? But
Yes.
he's also assimilating certain like racist attitudes. Um, there's like the other part in the book we can get into detail about it later, where like there's a burning cross in their yard, and then a bunch of like his black neighbors come and try to help him put out the fire, and like he literally says like no, like get out of here, I don't want like more trouble, like you're just going to cause trouble, right? And he gets like really upset about the whole thing. And I think like that's kind of like Yang like trying to show like part of the dangers of like assimilating to such a degree, or trying to assimilate to such a degree, is that it kind of like blocks us off from seeing how like other like minorities also exist like and deal with the racism, right? And how they could actually be, and how they actually experience like the world the way that we do, right? And by trying to like
Mm-hmm.
be so hard into the majority like culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
We kind of forget that like that there are other ones out there who also like are kind of experiencing the same things as us, because like realistically, if
Mm-hmm.
like the Klan is burning across in your yard, I would argue that like your black neighbors are probably the ones who understand the situation the most and would
I
probably be
don't
the
think
most
that's an
helpful here.
argument. I think that's just a fact.
Yes, you're right. um and it's just kind of like heartbreaking to see him turn away like actual help
Mm-hmm.
because of a certain like mindset that he has like uh gained, the a certain mindset that he's obtained by like trying to like assimilate so much.
Yeah, no. And I, again, like, the, we're not going to get into details, but I'm going to get into the details. Uh,
We're bad at this.
I know. We're not professional podcasters yet, guys. Please don't expect too much from this. But like one of the great parts about that scene where he's like, go get out of here, like I don't want any more trouble. Is that, two of the guys are like, all right, like, let's get out of here. Like, they don't want us around. Perfectly understandable, reaction. But then
I
the
get that.
third guy, who actually ends up being the inspector of the police department, he says this, like, really great line of, like, they have a burning cross on their lawn tonight, guys. Like, even if they don't want to admit it, they are us tonight. And
Yeah.
that hit really, really, really hard because I think that, like you said, like it's it's difficult to want to fit into a group because every group ostracizes another group, right? So if the Lees want to assimilate with their white suburban neighbors, they simultaneously have to reject their black neighbors because that's what their majority of their white neighbors are doing, right? If they want to assimilate to suburbia, they also have to accept the fact that they will always be inherently different from everyone else who lives in that community, right? Like, these are hard truths to accept, but at the end of the day, like, they are truths nonetheless, And, again, like, this is just a testament to Yang's writing and his ability to get these messages across in a way that is just extremely effective, right? But it's like, you cannot have your cake and eat it too, right? If you accept this, then you reject this. If you reject this, then you have to accept this. And those are not hard and fast rules, but they're hard and fast rules where you are right now, right?
Hmm.
And if you don't want to deal with being ostracized, then sometimes you have to be the ostracizer. And that sucks, right?
Yeah.
And it's broken. It's a broken system, but it's also very clear that the people who are being subjected to that system did not create that system. So, all in all, it's very complicated and it's nuanced, but at the same time, Yang makes it very, very simple. He doesn't make it like one dimensional. Like, he doesn't reduce this topic down into something that, isn't what it actually is. But again, I think that like the simple language and the way that it's geared towards like kids, right? Like a very younger audience, is like he makes everything so much more just like smooth. I don't really know how to describe it,
It makes
but
it easily digestible, I think.
yeah, like it's very palatable. Yeah, for sure. No, but yeah, it's that scene hit hard. That's good. We're gonna go into more details on that scene.
We promise. All right. So we've been here a while. Why don't we take a break for a second, and
Okay,
then
awesome.
we can come back. This podcast is brought to you by your local comic book store. And yes, I mean your local comic book store. Like, get on your phone, type in comic book store into the Maps app, and go to that one. That specific one. Trust me, they're awesome, they're great, and if you see a copy of Superman Smashes the Klan there, grab yourself one of those. It's definitely worth it. And we're back. All right. So, uh, third theme. Let's talk about third theme. Immigration.
Ah,
This one's fun.
yes.
I guess it kind of relates to simulation, but also kind of they're different words. I'm gonna treat them differently. How about that?
Yeah.
For so I think something like really cool about this book is that it really highlights that Superman's an immigrant. You know, he's one of us.
I know. It's actually really cool to see how they sort of handled that part of his story and that part of his canon. I really like the way that they went with it. At least in the comic, I'm not sure. You could probably tell me how it sort of happens in the radio show, but the way that Yang especially puts this like special emphasis on how, again, we touched on this a little bit in the assimilation theme, but that Superman is different, right? And the only reason that people regard him as good is because he is good in a different way, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
or that he's different in a good way, right? That's the only reason why he's being treated with, pretty much this like general air of respect. Like people don't really know anything about him. They're just kind of like, well, at least he's like on our side, you know. And they sort of just take that at face value and they sort of run with it. But how is that sort of handled in the show? Is he mentioned as an immigrant at all?
Not really. The whole subplot of Superman discovering and coming to grips with his immigrant identity, his alien identity, like literally they say alien in the book. It's all from the book. Like that's all things that I mean, that story isn't new, but Yang using that story in this context alongside a Roberta story is, I think, like a genius piece of parallel writing here,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Because as Superman is trying to understand and grapple with these, Roberta's also doing it, and she actually learns some things about like being an immigrant and like not fitting in, and she gets to like confer those lessons to Superman, which then spurs his character growth and allows him to like unlock that part of himself that he would unlock and accept that part of himself that he wasn't like really sure about this whole time.
Yeah, I think that again, something that I just love about this book is that the main protagonist is a little Asian girl, you know, and the fact that she gets to help and again, like help and fight alongside Superman, right? Like one of the most prolific superheroes of all time, and help him come to terms with his identity in this book is just it's so good. It's so good. It's so powerful. She's just girl bossing her way through this book, honestly, and it's great. Um, Something that I also wanted to note about the immigrant narrative in terms of Superman specifically as well is this idea that he. Oh, also, I feel like this is some important context to mention. So, like, in the book, Superman doesn't actually have all of his powers yet. So he can't fly, he doesn't have laser eyes, he doesn't have cold breath. I'm pretty sure really all he can do right now is like move super fast and he has super strength and that's it. Yeah, that's it.
Well, he can do the other things. He's just purposely suppressing them because he doesn't want to be different.
Yes, right. So he doesn't have all of his powers yet because he is purposefully sort of not purposefully, but like he's suppressed all of these things because he's traumatized that he's going to be too different from other people and that's going to scare them. And something that is really fascinating about that is that this idea that immigration not only comes with this inherent, you know, I am different from these people aspect, right? But it also comes with this idea of when you immigrate to somewhere else, you need to give something up in return to go there. And Superman gives up his powers really, or he doesn't let himself explore that side of himself. And yeah, that was fascinating. You wouldn't think that, and again, we don't think about these things in this way. At least I didn't think about them in this way, but I would never consider like an alien coming down from another planet as being parallel to like an immigration narrative, right? Like that's so ridiculous to me as, you know, as an adult who understands how things work. But like it works. It's so good. It works and it's
It's
so
very
good.
good.
It's amazing. And it touches on everything it needs to and it's fantastic. Yeah.
I think something that kind of happens was like so the way that comics work is that like a lot of different artists and writers work on them, right? So sometimes some things are like elevated, some like themes and like character traits are like talked about more than others. And I think sometimes the immigrant nature of like Superman's whole thing sometimes gets lost in some of the comics, right? In the radio
Mhm.
show, it's actually very lost, um, and people don't talk about it. And I something I really appreciate about Yang, like not only bringing it up, but making it very explicit that like, yeah, Superman's an immigrant. Like
Yeah.
that's just something you're gonna like. That's just something that's actually a thing,
Yep.
right? And it really is cool to know that this is like a fundamental part of Superman's identity. Like we can see a bit of ourselves in it, and it's also really cool in like a historical perspective because um, the original creators of Superman, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, were actually both sons of immigrants, right? So
Mhm.
it's not like Superman at some point someone decided to write a backstory. Now he's an immigrant. It was kind of like the point the whole time, right? Even when his backstory didn't explicitly make him an immigrant, these people were writing a bit of themselves into Superman,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So Superman from the start was always a little bit of this, right? It was
Yes.
always a fundamental part of who he was.
Yeah, no. And it's it's fascinating to me too though because like it's again, it's so simple too though because like an alien, right? The definition of the term alien, right, as we know it in the English language, used to mean like a stranger from a strange land, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when that term was coined, it really meant like immigrants, right? Like people who came to this land from another land. But then when obviously like sci-fi sort of came in, they retro used that word into something else that usually meant, like extraterrestrial beings, because at that point we had already explored all of the quote unquote strange lands that were out there. So alien wasn't the right term for people who were immigrants anymore, you know? Um, Also, it like generally became kind of derogatory to call people aliens. It sort of, again, it was this very key sense of the word of being used to differentiate people into different groups, right? So we haven't met aliens yet, so we don't really have to worry about them being offended if we call them that. But no, yeah, it was very interesting to me that there is this, this word that we understand, at least as a modern audience, right, reading this now, we understand this word as it being used this way. But the first time that the word alien is ever used in the comic is when one of the Klan members is talking about the Lees.
Yeah,
So it's good. It's so good. It's
the
so
parallels are
good.
very strong, and it's amazing. I also like really like how like there are a lot of immigrant narratives in like in the Asian American canon. It's kind of like the foundation of where we kind of started this whole podcast. But I think it's really cool that Superman, as an immigrant, he came here as an immigrant, but as like a child.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like the general immigrant story we get like our parents tell us. It's very much more of an immigrant story that's closer to a lot of our experience. I think your experience in particular, right, of coming here when you were like a lot younger,
Mm-hmm.
right, and growing up, uh, like still forming your identity and your culture,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Superman didn't come from Krypton as like an adult. He came as a baby, so he is both simultaneously foreign, but he grew up never really seeing himself as foreign, even though other people might.
Mm-hmm. And there is, again, these ideas of him being super, right? Being Superman, right? He is a man with super abilities, right? That's how he is perceived to be by the people in the book. Um, and again, there's this like really great moment where Roberta is like, it feels like you're holding back because you still want to be Superman and not super something else. And
Mm-hmm.
again, like it's just that's how it is. That is how we grow to become assimilated and wanting to be assimilated, right? Like we talked about before, but like the immigrant narrative is so key to that in some ways and not key to it in other ways. Um like being an alien is not really the only reason why Superman is afraid of assimilation. Like he's afraid that he's going to be feared or looked down upon or, all of these other things. And so, I don't know, like it's like very nuanced, very layered,
Yeah.
but very simple.
I
Yeah.
also think doing all this exploration about being different and talking about how he like scared of being like out of the group, right? There's
Mhm.
like that one like scene that I love where right before he goes to the Fortress of Solitude, he goes to like to his parents' house, and it's like no matter what happens, right? Like I'm still always gonna be your son, right?
Yeah.
And it's just that
It's
beautiful
so
moment,
sad. It's so good.
that beautiful moment of like and understanding that no matter how much of an alien he is, he's still his parents' kids. He's still an American, right?
Mhm.
And like that's just something that like that the duality of like trying to come to grips with your both cultures, right? When we say
Mm-hmm.
Asian American, it's two words. It's Asian and it's American,
Mm-hmm.
right? And seeing Superman also dealing with that is just awesome to
Mm,
me.
for sure. And knowing that it is possible while also simultaneously somehow being impossible to accept both sides of yourself, right? Like Superman can never go back to Krypton because it's destroyed, right? But even if it
Yeah.
wasn't but even if it wasn't destroyed, there really wouldn't be any way for him to really get back there, right? And his
Mm-hmm.
parents are dead, right? So he can't go back to his parents really. So again, there's this dichotomy of like he comes into himself and he accepts all of himself, but there are fundamental ways where he cannot access other parts of himself, you know, and that's just the reality of it. And he accepts the reality as it is as a whole, right? Not favoring one side over the other, right? Not necessarily lamenting the loss of one side or another, but really just accepting like the reality, right? Just the fact of the matter that this is how it is, this is how he needs to be, um, and he can't complain about it, you know, because that's just how it is. And yeah, no, the part where he visits his parents before he, you know, has this moment of I'm going to accept both parts of myself is very, very sweet. And
This
I
book's
don't know, it's just it's
good.
very interesting also to just see like just like on a literary sort of like just reading this as like a, you know, just a normal pleb, right? Um
Mm-hmm.
is like Superman is like an emotionally sort of engaging character. Which not that he isn't in his other stories, but it's sometimes we forget that people who have powers have emotions. Sometimes we forget that
Yeah.
people who are at the top, again, like whether that be like celebrities or whatever, like those people have emotions and they have feelings too, and they perceive the world to be a certain way, and they deserve to be treated as human. You know, it's very I just again like with all of the comic book and superhero content that's out there right now, it is very like emotion based and very, you know, backstory based, and like we see all these people dealing with like very complex sort of challenges to their like personal past and stuff. But to see that with Superman, who I feel like is the superhero of superheroes, right? Sort of the person who paved the way for all of these other superheroes, having his own emotional moments and stuff was really sweet. It wasn't unique, but it was really sweet that it was him, and it was really sweet that it was the way that it was in connection with like the narrative that it was supposed to embody.
Yeah.
But yeah,
All right. So any final thoughts before we move on to to the radio show?
this book
So any
is
final thoughts about?
so good.
It's very good.
That's it.
Very good. I think for me, uh I always had this like perception, like growing up Asian American, I think we kind of just like understand that certain things in media aren't meant for us. And like that's cool. Like I don't have a problem with that,
Right.
frankly. It's just a thing that we understand. And I always thought that comic books and Superman in particular was one of those things, right?
Mhm.
That's just like it just wasn't meant for us. They're fun stories, but like I never really saw myself in them.
Mhm.
And something that I just love that this book brought out so well is that like no, like Superman, like his story is like intimately intertwined with immigrant narratives,
Mhm.
right? With identity and assimilation and trying to figure out both sides of yourself, and seeing that like uh, this American icon, right? This
Mm.
American icon not only stands for like all like the big American ideals like truth and justice, but he also like stands for the ideal of accepting people that are different,
Mm.
right? It is so cool because Superman to me is always like represented what America can be, what it wants to be, what it's supposed to be, like the ideal America. And this book really tells me by having Superman grapple and understand and accept his like immigrant identity so well is that part of what it means to be American, part of what the great American like dream is also like intimately intertwined with like diversity and being different and accepting that.
Yeah. No. Yep. That's good. It's good. It's so good.
It's very good. All right, so we talked about like the big themes in the book. So I think we want to take a little bit of time to talk about the radio show and how interestingly different that was. And I think part of it is to highlight how great the radio show was, but I think it's also part of it is to highlight how great Yang's writing was because some of the
Mm.
things that Yang adds, uh, you can really get to appreciating them knowing that Yang was the one who added that.
For sure, for sure. Yeah. Let's get into
uh,
it.
so number one, I think the biggest difference that stands out to me is like Superman smashes the Klan. Actually, how should we shorthand this? Uh, I'm just gonna say the graphic novel and then the radio show. Okay, so
Okay.
to not confuse the names because the names are like kind of pretty similar.
The Superman Smashes the Klan radio show is the Superman Smashes the
So the graphic novel actually is really interesting in that it has a lot of great female characters.
Yeah.
The female characters in the radio show were just like straight non-existent, and if they were there, they
Yay!
weren't great. uh, I don't know about you, but I really love Lois Lane's depiction in the graphic novel.
Yes. No, she is. Again, we just have so many girl bosses. Yang gave us some straight up girl bosses. Um, Something that I do appreciate a lot as well, just like on again consuming this as a modern audience, is that I feel like nowadays Lois Lane has really sort of been just like she's just been one dimensionified until she became like Superman's love interest. It's like Lois Lane didn't originally have a personality because she was a woman in a comic book that came out of the early 1900s, and then she was given a personality by modern media, and then subsequently got her personality taken away again because of modern media. It's very interesting. But I'm glad they gave her personality back.
Interestingly enough, like Lois Lane in like the original like Superman runs, I can't say she was perfect as far as like uh what you would want in like a good female character,
Mm,
but she was also like very much built to be like anti like what the news media was
mm,
at that time because like a lot of depictions about women in like the news at that time was very much about like uh these are like either they're like getting sidelined or they are good
yeah.
at their jobs, but then they have to like give up their jobs because they want to like have a family or something like that.
Yeah.
And Lois Lane was like really intentionally trying to be not that, right? Like the original Lois Lane was very much focused on her job and she didn't want to like have to do anything with like Clark Kent or like love or anything like that.
Mm.
Um, she was like very specifically designed to try to fight those stereotypes about like women's and their career.
Interesting. And then Zack Snyder came along and
It wasn't
made
just
all
Zack Snyder, okay?
Zack
Lois Lane
Snyder,
as a character,
he's just my old
yeah,
punching bag.
yeah. Lois Lane as a character kind of like ebbs and flows in and out of like being a good like female character, not at times. And I don't even think she was perfect in the original runs, uh, but it was surprising how much better it was than I thought that time period was
Yeah,
capable.
it is interesting that yeah, she is a subversion of a trope from back then, but then like her character as it continued going, like the woman who's only concerned about her job and doesn't want a man and like all of that stuff also became a trope. So they had to like change her again. Does that make any sense?
She does eventually have a kid later. I think there's like certain runs of Superman later where they like want Superman to be single again, so they like try to give him a kid in order to like take her out of the picture, and then they backtrack on it a couple times and like all sorts of things. Like,
Yeah, there's like way
uh,
too many
I I,
Superman stories to keep track of.
I think the really interesting thing about comics is that like as an artistic medium that gets handed down from writer to writer, that gets a bunch of different interpretations. Sometimes you get some like really genius, crazy, great stuff, and sometimes you just get some things where it's just like, dang, that was rough.
That's a choice. Yeah.
But going on the point about like how like surprisingly progressive uh these like pieces of art was,
Mm-hmm.
the radio show was like kind of amazing in how overtly anti-racist it is. Like there
Yeah.
will be scenes where the Klansmen are like saying like these like they're just like espousing their ideology,
Oh yeah.
right? And then a character will immediately, or if not the character, the narrator sometimes will even just come in and be like, "Yeah, that's just wrong."
Yeah.
Like no like debates or anything about it. They just straight up say that like, "No, that's like racist.
Yeah.
That's actually really bad. You guys
Yeah.
are like evil." Or they'll say, "Oh, there's this one great scene where J- Jimmy Olsen and Perry White are like tied up, right? And the Klan is like talking about how like the white people are like the true Americans, and then Jimmy Olsen's like, yeah, but what about the Native Americans?
That's awesome.
Right, like this whole time, Jimmy Olsen is like being depicted as like really scared and like he's like tied up and he's scared and doesn't want to die. And then like the minute the Klansman says something like incoherently racist, Jimmy Olsen's like, yeah, but like we weren't here first.
Jimmy Olsen was scared for his survival until they brought the Native Americans into it. And
Exactly.
Jimmy Olsen was like, this shit just got personal. Fuck you.
I really appreciate Jimmy Olsen's depiction in both the graphic novel and the radio show,
That's
and
awesome
how
though.
just like on the right side he is. Like it's just it's just nice seeing someone who just like gets it, that's not part of your group but understands it and like
Oh yeah.
gets it and can sympathize and like is on your side with this. Like it's just Jimmy
Yeah,
Olsen just
no, yeah,
he's just cool,
and then
man. I
there's
just
that
love Jimmy
part where
Olsen.
like him and Roberta are like roasting clan members, and he's like, he's like, "Oh yeah, you like racist pointy-headed ghost," and it's like, Jimmy, I love you. I would die for you.
Yeah.
Although,
I just
like
yeah.
the idea that in again, this came out in the 1940s. The way that a character overtly called out like white supremacist groups having faulty ideology of like this land is ours, like we are entitled to it, by bringing up, not by saying like that's wrong, but by bringing up the Native Americans. That's crazy to me. There's people nowadays who still don't make that argument. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's wild though,
I
that's
I think
crazy.
I think sometimes it feels like the past was a lot more like, I mean the past is pretty racist, frankly. But I also think like sometimes like we need to remember that, or maybe we don't need to remember, but it's nice to know that also like among all that were also people who weren't, right? Like
Mhm.
there was slavery, but there was also people who were fighting for abolition, right?
Yeah.
There was there was like anti-Asian sentiment, but there was also like the radio show that was very against that type of thing,
Yeah.
right? And and it's nice. It's just like a little comforting to know that like even in times in which we feel like we're the worst,
Mm.
and we're really bad, there were
Mhm.
still people who stood up for like the right thing and like we're trying to fight
Mhm.
for for people that they didn't even really have to fight for. Like like they
Yeah, no.
didn't have to publish this thing, but they did, and that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I again, and like this is why I appreciate this story being retold and remade by Yang, and like the way that it, again, it added a lot of elements to it, but really the base of it is the same, right? Like the Asian American family moving to Metropolis, like that's still in there, and yes, they are Asian American, right? And the cross does get burned in
Hmm.
their front yard, right? Like a lot of the characters are still the same. It's just, it's fascinating to me that the story, again, like for me, the earliest I've ever heard of like Asian American representation at least for me as a kid, and again, like my mom didn't know about this show. Like I asked her about it, and she wasn't into comic books when growing up, but like she was. She wasn't alive in the 1940s. That would make my
Yeah, I was
mom.
about to say, to
No,
be
no,
fair,
no.
like,
She wasn't
I don't
alive
think,
then.
like, yeah, I
But
don't think your mom was alive during the
not the
40s.
40s, but she was alive when a lot of these sort of giant movements were sort of coming around and becoming really prolific, right? Like she lived through a lot
Mhm.
of that stuff and she still didn't see herself represented in media in the same way. Like my mom's favorite show when she was in college and stuff was like Friends, right?
Mhm.
She grew up in America like in the 80s and 90s, right? She had me in 2001, and the earliest I was ever exposed to anything even remotely close to Asian American representation was when I watched the Disney movie Mulan, which is not Asian American representation.
Yeah, it is, it is not Asian. Yeah, it's
It's
literally about a person in
no,
China.
yes, it's like
Very not Asian
it's a
American.
no, it's not Asian American, right? Like it's like an old Chinese myth, right? Or Mulan was a historical character, but whatever. I'm not gonna get into that. The point is, the idea that it still boggles my mind saying this out loud. The idea that there was Asian American representation in conjunction with an anti-racist, anti-white supremacist radio show featuring Superman punching Klan members and bringing them down after they had burned a cross in the front yard of an Asian American family in the 1940s blows my fucking mind. It really does. Like
It is so cool.
it's so cool. And again, like I never would have heard of this one without you, but two, probably never would have heard about it unless Yang made the comic, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that would be like the biggest thing I would bring up in terms of comparing and contrasting at least the two forms of media, right? Is that like this one is accessible to us. The novel is accessible to us. Um, it's also accessible to people who are much younger than us. It was written to be accessed specifically by them. So yeah, no, that's crazy. Did have
Yeah.
a quick question about the radio show though. Is there like a target audience for this radio show? Like, was it geared more towards adults or more towards kids? Like, could you sort of tell by listening to it?
So I can't really tell if it was towards adults or kids, but I can tell that the radio show very much felt like, in the way that the graphic novel very much feels like, um, it's for Asian Americans in a very particular way.
Yeah.
The radio show really didn't feel like it was for Asian Americans. It
Yeah.
really felt like it was trying to fight racism on the front of fighting it, among like the way that white people are thinking,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because actually, um, the Asian American aspect of the radio show, while the main victims of the racism are, the Lees, a Chinese American family,
Mm-hmm.
the they're not really the main characters of the story, right?
Mm.
The real main characters of the story are like Clark Kent, um, Jimmy Olsen, and Riggs. The what's his name?
Chuck.
Chuck Riggs. Chuck Riggs. Right? And it's really, and I think that different perspective makes the story feel like, well, of course it makes the story feel very different because one, a lot of the immigration and like assimilation things aren't happening in the story, right?
Right.
Like Superman is full-fledged Superman at the beginning, right? He's not having any like worries about who he is and whatnot. He knows who he is,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Gotcha. Yeah.
And it also makes the story a bit more focused on like the psychology of like these like white characters and them processing racism about why they shouldn't do it, right?
Mm.
Whereas the graphic novel is very much about Superman and Roberta trying to understand themselves and their identity.
Mm-hmm.
uh, the radio show, on the other hand, is very much like Chuck Riggs, being put in this like really like crazy, intense, uncomfortable situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Which, by the
all the
way,
characters around him.
Chuck Riggs is one of the family members of one of the Klan members.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's the nephew of the Grand
Yeah.
Scorpion, which is like the big clan member of that chapter.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and you really, yeah, you really get to see him, really grapple with like all these conflicting emotions about like here like I know what the right thing to do is, but like I'm also scared and like how do I deal with like these people like in my family and things like that. And it's really like trying to I think help people in certain situations like his, right, where they might have like no people who are in the Klan, right,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to help them like understand and be comfortable with calling it out,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is like really different, but also really really cool in its own different way.
Mm.
But going back to your original question, yes, the audiences. I don't know if they were adults or kids, but it was definitely very different than the audience that the graphic novel was for.
Yes. I do think it's interesting though that like obviously the point of these two things are very different. Like the goal and the message that you're sort of trying to get across. I mean, obviously Yang has in his story that the Klan is bad, right? But
Mm-hmm.
the radio show is obviously trying, it's very focused on the Klan aspect of it, right? Whereas nowadays Yang doesn't necessarily have to focus on the Klan being wrong because we know that the Klan is wrong, right? Like enough time has passed
Yeah.
where we're like, we don't necessarily need to be like pushing this message quite as strongly anymore.
Yeah.
Whereas like back then they were like, we need to make this like every other line.
It's like kind of behind the Nazis. The Klan is like the prototypical like evil like racist organization.
Yeah, which is funny that you bring up Nazis because the first person that Superman punches in the novel is a Nazi.
That is true. Though I think we'll have to save that for the next episode because he actually does not make any appearance in the radio show. That's a Yang
Ooh,
specific thing here.
interesting. No, yeah, like yeah, the first, so when On recommended this novel to me, right, I did not get a physical copy of the book. I got the Kindle copy of the book. And there was a moment where I opened the first page of it, and then I got to the second page of it, and the guy that Superman is beating up has a swastika in the middle of his chest. And I took my iPad that had my Kindle version of this book on it, and I zoomed in on the swastika, and I took a screenshot of it.
So you're telling me your iPad just has like a screenshot of a swastika and like it's so zoomed in, no
No,
one's gonna know why you have a screenshot of a
yeah.
swastika.
No, it's still attached to the guy.
Okay.
No, yeah, no, it's still attached to the villain, but no, I just thought that was like crazy because this sort of is like it ties back into a little bit of what we were talking about earlier, but like the messaging of the radio show had to be that overt, right? About how bad it was. But like
They literally call like Klan members like equivalent to Nazis in the radio show. They
yeah.
literally like these guys like Germans had Nazis, we have Klan members.
Yeah, and that's
Crazy.
crazy because I feel like people don't really use that analogy as much anymore, especially not in modern media. Like, we have Nazi stand ins in modern media, which is kind of crazy. Like,
Yeah.
like there was a movie that I saw a few weeks ago that, had like this, it was talking about, it was completely fictional. It was like a sci-fi movie, right? But they were like, yeah, like in like history, there was like this group of people, and I was like, say their names. Say their names. They have names. Like you can say them. They didn't say them, right? Like they did not say the word
Mhm.
Nazi, and it was like, are we really walking around the word Nazi now? Like, are we really gonna try and make it? Are we gonna dumb this down now? Like what? That's a choice, right? And so I really appreciate Yang and the radio show really going ham on like the Nazis are bad and white supremacists are just as bad.
Yeah, I really love that. Uh though we talk a lot of good things about the radio show, though I
Mm-hmm.
think a a very useful point of media criticism, right? It's also like talking about the things that like don't work or maybe have aged poorly.
Right.
Uh Things that are potentially problematic, right? And I'm gonna be fair to like every single piece of art that we look at. I'm gonna try to find like things that could be problematic, and I want to talk about them not because it makes the art bad, but because it's worth talking about,
Mm-hmm.
right? And frankly, and I do understand I'm gonna miss things like we don't talk about any of this stuff in the graphic novel
Mm-hmm.
because I can't find many problematic things. But I guarantee you, there are there, and as we as a society like age and evolve and understand things better, like they'll probably find something. Um,
Right.
but I'm saying this because I want to talk about the radio show, and I want to talk about it, and I want to be like genuinely critical about it. But I'm not saying that I don't like it either. I actually do really love this radio show.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but there are actually parts of the radio show which, for a radio show that's interestingly so anti-racist, it has some like really odd racial characters in it. Gosh, that is a hard word to say.
Caricatures.
Characters, yeah.
Yes.
So like, Dr. Lee and like Tommy Lee, in the graphic novel are like really interesting, complex characters, but in the radio show, they're pretty like two-dimensional, and they really kind of almost like straight up just embody that type of like that meek Asian stereotype, right?
Mm.
There was actually like the scene in the radio show that like, I felt kind of weird about, where Dr. Lee is like he's like packing up and moving his family out because like a cross just got burned in his front yard.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like depicted as this like really scared dude. Uh, he has an accent, and I, I I don't know about that one. But yeah, he's being depicted as this like really scared dude, and like Superman literally has to like lecture him. All right, Superman's like, like, you can't we have to like stand up to bullies. We just can't let them like get away with this,
Mm.
right? And it feels kind of like dismissive of the genuine fear that minorities would have if they experience something like that. Like, I get it.
Mm.
There is a lot of standing up that has to be done, but I also don't blame anyone for wanting to like get the hell out of there after a cross got burned in your yard, like,
Yeah.
it feels like Superman, he's right in the sense that we do need to stand up, but also like it's kind of easy for him to say he's Superman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? Like, it's a lot easier to stand up to the Klan when they can't hurt you.
Right. Yes. Yeah. No. Yeah. No. That's. Yeah. That's also something we see in the novel, right? Is this like the way that normal people, the people who are not Superman, have to stand up to the Klan and deal with them is very different from the way that Superman deals with the Klan, right? There's a reason why it's called Superman Smashes the Klan. It's because that's what he does, you know? Um, they're, you can't fight them any other way. We don't see people really being able to fight them, at least not on the physical level, right? On the
Mhm.
intellectual level, an argument can be made that like Roberta fights them on a fundamental level a few times, and like on a psychological level, but like the violence that they are in pursuit of towards these people like cannot be stopped unless Superman comes in and stops it. Like there is, I don't want to say that he stops it with other violence because I feel like there's definitely a difference between the things that the Klan does and the things Superman does to stop them, because he literally just punches a few guys and then the rest of them get scared and stop doing what they're doing, right? Um,
Mhm.
so he doesn't necessarily stop it with like more violence, but like there's definitely a physical aspect there that he has that other regular people don't have to be able to fight this threat off, right? So yeah, it's interesting that yeah, no, that's in the novel as well.
All right. So any last thoughts about like the book or the radio show? Anything
um
else to say?
I just want to like a moment of freaking appreciation for the people who came up with the idea for the radio show and how that like subsequently influenced people to like heckle Klan meetings and like because that just screams like that's such a Gen Z reaction, to like to like listening to a piece of media and being like, you know what I'm gonna do to react to this? This is badass. I'm gonna go heckle a white supremacist now. Like that is amazing, and I love it. And I
Well,
still
we have a cultural
I
connection
know.
with
I'm
the
like,
1940s.
yeah, no, that checks out. That follows. That's he like me for real, like. But yeah, no, like I still can't believe that this book was written when it was written, and I have such like immense appreciation for it and for Yang, for creating something so just marvelous out of it, and something that, like, I mean, like, again, we'll get into this, but like the ending made me cry. The ending made me cry like a baby. Um, and it wasn't just because the Superman was smashing clan members. That was a part of it. I did cry when he smashed clan members, tears of joy. But um, like, I think that Yang added this very human, very interpersonal element to it. That just, I don't know. It was so good. It was so good. I cried so much. It was so good. But yeah, huge thanks to the people who made this idea and for coming up with it, and for Yang for
it's
taking it upon himself to make it even better than it originally was.
it's awesome. It's
It's
awesome.
awesome. It's awesome.
All right. So at the beginning of this podcast, we just off the cuff said that we were going to rank our top picks,
Mm.
give them a little tier list, or maybe not just our top picks, but everything that we do. We're
Mm-hmm.
gonna put them in a little tier list. Uh, and just for like people listening, yeah, we did not plan that out. That literally happened off the cuff. Let's talk a little bit about how we want to do a ranking system.
Well, I think there definitely needs to be like S tier things, and then we can go like A, B, C, D, E, and then we could probably go to like F, right? Or do you want to stop at D? We
Uh,
could do D and then F. Like my
okay, okay.
grades.
Yeah. There's no E on our grades. You're right. All right. So, going back one episode since this is new, where are we gonna put "Always Be My Maybe"?
Always be my maybe. I would probably put that in B tier. B tier because I loved it. I thought it was very touching. I do also, we should probably like, we'll do it after we rank what we have so far, and if we need to move things around we can, but we should probably make
Okay.
criteria for all of our tiers.
What's B? B's like good. B's good.
On, I
B's
meant
good.
like I meant more like, like, oh, like how well does it fit into like, the canon of like Asian American art and like the influence that it had on our
Actually,
culture. You're like,
should
B is good, A is really good.
wait. Should we even use like an A through F thing, because like Asians get like really associated with like grades, and like I don't know, it's just kind of weird to me that we're like grading things in the way that we don't like to be graded. Like we got a lot of this like trauma from like having to deal with like getting good grades. Maybe we shouldn't do this to the art
Yeah,
that
we're
we're
gonna get an
analyzing.
email from Randall Park being like, you guys gave me a B? My dad's gonna be so mad. No, I think we should do it because I really want to give Rent a Girlfriend an F.
Like it deserves.
Like, it even deserves to be on the list, okay?
Teaser for a couple episodes down the line.
um, I'm okay with it. Finally, I'm the
Okay.
one who has the power to give bad grades.
Okay, so always be my maybe.
B.
So B. What does B mean?
I think B means that it was really cute. It was really touching. It had some, again, like just really great moments of like very subtle, um, like representation, and also like representation diversion, and it had lots of great ideas for like how to make a story with people of color that acknowledges that they're people of color without making the entire story about the fact that they are people of color. But at the same time, I think that it was pretty basic in terms of being a rom-com. Like, there wasn't really anything in it that I was like, this is mind blowing, except for Keanu Reeves, which might make it like a B plus tier. Am I giving it a higher grade because Keanu Reeves is in it? Yes. Yes, I am. Do I regret it? I do not. Also, Randall Park is in it. I freaking love Randall Park. I would die for Randall Park, so I'm giving it a B plus.
Okay, B
End
plus.
end of my explanation. So
A solid 80, 87,
yes,
88. Just kidding.
87 weighted total 87.65.
Yeah. The GPA is looking like a
Yeah,
3.8.
yeah, yeah.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. All right. Yeah. For me though, like, I liked it. It was fun. I think it was like I had positive feelings towards it. Right.
Mhm.
Like it wasn't just something I walked out and I just like didn't feel anything. Didn't want to talk about it. There was a lot of fun to had to be talked about it.
Mhm.
And I really enjoyed it. I don't think it's like the craziest thing ever.
Mhm.
Right. But it was fun. I enjoyed it. I think a B is like probably pretty good.
Mhm.
B to an A. I'd be happy with that.
Mhm. You know what I think is going to
Okay.
be the hardest things to rank?
What?
Things that fall into like C tier.
Probably.
Because like when you're ranking things, you don't really think about things that you find average when you want to like make a podcast about it. So you're like, I don't know, like you're automatically starting off from like a source material that you didn't
Yeah.
necessarily like think was compelling enough to give it
Yeah.
like above a B or an A. So I don't know.
We
That'll
will
be
probably have like
interesting.
a we'll probably have like some sort of reverse bell curve
Ooh, yeah.
where like we're only gonna talk about things that we really really love or
Yeah,
really really
yeah,
hate.
yeah.
It's probably not gonna be anything that's just eh.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like it's just not fun to talk about.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Did we just seriously use reverse bell curve in association with
Yes.
on on we're so Asian.
We're so
We're so
Asian. It's not
Asian. It's not
okay.
okay. The
Okay.
way that I
What about
immediately agreed with you too. Oh my god. Okay, well.
Superman Smash with the Clan? Where are we putting
Oh,
this?
S tier for sure. S tier
S
for
tier.
sure.
Yeah.
I really cannot express to you how much I just thoroughly enjoyed every single moment of this book. It is, if you read from issues 1 to 3, it's about 170 pages, 180 pages, something like that. I read the whole thing in like one sitting. Which, granted, is not very difficult when it is like a graphic novel, but it was just it just wouldn't let go of me, you know. And the ending is just so perfect. It's so
She keeps talking
perfect.
about it, but I won't let her talk about it because it's for next episode.
Yes, it's so perfect. As like if Yang wanted to continue writing this series, he could go from where he ended it, and still have a very solid base for which to like build these characters further and things, right? But also like it's just a perfect ending to the story that already existed. It's so good. It's so good. It's so
It's
good.
very good.
S tier, no question.
S tier.
S
Yeah, I
plus
think I
plus plus
think
plus plus.
I think I'll agree with you. The way I normally rank media is like trash, bad, neutral, good, and then I would want to put it on my bookshelf,
Trash,
right?
bad, neutral, good.
Yeah, I don't like numerical ratings because like then you kind of have to get into the weeds of it.
Because
I
I'm
just I like to
traumatized
talk
from
about.
getting bad grades as a child, so.
I didn't even get bad grades as a child. That's the weird part. Uh,
No.
no, it's more that like I care a lot more about how I feel about the media rather than like that's a number one thing to me, right? Like no matter all like the objective qualities of it, if it made me feel like if it gave me like certain strong emotions, whatever those are, then I think that's inherently just cooler.
Mm.
Um, and I think this is one of those. Well, it is one of those where I would want it on my bookshelf because I do own it and it is on my bookshelf. It is genuinely like one of those great things where it's like I want to have it there. I want to come back to it, right? Like
I want my kids to
uh,
read it when I have
I want my
kids.
kids to read
If I have
it.
kids, yeah. No,
Yeah.
for sure.
Um. Yeah, and you know, that's one of those,
Yeah.
and I do own physical copies of them, so it's S tier. Let's go for it.
Awesome, awesome. Well, y'all know that we're gonna bounce into it the next episode, so we'll see you there.
This podcast was produced by Yeji.
It was created and written by both of us,
It was edited by me.
and the cover art was done by my good friend Emma Nebecker.